At the edge of the town stood an old, abandoned house, left untouched for many years. A massive banyan tree loomed in front, its branches spread so wide that sunlight could scarcely reach the ground beneath. The local people believed that something strange and terrifying lurked inside the house. No one dared to go near it at night because odd sounds were often heard coming from within. Some said that the curtains in the windows would occasionally part, revealing a faint reddish glow from inside. Sheriff was a college student with a deep interest in the town's ancient traditions and history. He was particularly drawn to old, deserted places. So when he heard about this house, an unusual curiosity awoke within him. He decided to unravel its mysteries. His friend Raffi repeatedly warned him against it, saying, "This house has a dark history. Many say it's inhabited by unearthly forces." But Sheriff believed these were mere superstitions. So, one evening, Sheriff and Raffi made up their minds to enter the house and uncover its secrets, proving that the ghost stories were false. As dusk approached and dark clouds gathered in the sky, Sheriff and Raffi bravely headed toward the house. The air was filled with an eerie chill, as if something was waiting for them. They stopped in front of the house, and the old wooden door emitted a strange, unpleasant smell, as if it hadn't been opened for years. Raffi's face was pale with fear, but Sheriff was determined. He pushed open the door, which creaked loudly, as if something had just been awakened from a deep sleep. As they stepped inside, they were met with profound darkness. In the flickering candlelight, they saw strange paintings on the walls that made their blood run cold. The images on the walls told a horrifying tale. It depicted an ancient ritual with a group of people and an otherworldly entity. Their eyes were filled with terror, and the entity held a glowing knife, dripping with blood. Sheriff and Raffi, deeply unnerved by the paintings, ventured further inside. The interior of the house felt like another world. Bones scattered across the floor, dried bloodstains in corners, and a dreadful stench filled the air, instilling a deep sense of fear. In one of the inner rooms, Raffi suddenly spotted an old book. The book appeared to be very ancient. Its cover had some inscriptions that were incomprehensible. Sheriff opened the book, revealing pages filled with a strange language they couldn't understand. However, the corners of the pages had some sketches that sent shivers down their spines. The drawings showed a large circle with people standing inside, and before them was a massive shadowy figure. The figure was so terrifying that they didn't dare to examine it closely. As they flipped through the book, the room seemed to grow colder, and Sheriff felt as if someone or something was watching them. Sheriff quickly closed the book and decided they should leave the room. But just then, the door slammed shut. Raffi tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Then they heard a faint murmuring from the other side of the door. At first, it was faint, but it grew louder, as if someone or something was there. Raffi was now petrified, his face ashen, and Sheriff, too, felt a surge of fear. They realized they were facing something far beyond their control. As Sheriff and Raffi struggled to figure out what to do, the lights in the room suddenly went out. They were plunged into darkness, unable to see anything. The candles began to extinguish one by one. For a moment, there was complete silence in the room, and then suddenly, Sheriff felt the presence of something else in the room. Something unseen was slowly approaching them. A cold current seemed to flow through the room, as if a frigid wind was rising from beneath the ground. Sheriff tried to muster his courage, but his feet felt glued to the spot. Raffi retreated to a corner, trembling and unable to speak. Then they heard the whispering shadows around them. The whispers weren't just sounds, but a cold, terrifying force that consumed their minds and bodies. Sheriff felt as though his breath was being sucked away, as if the room itself was draining the life out of him. Fear and panic were etched on his face. He realized that the game they had started wouldn't end easily. They were facing a cursed force that had been trapped in this house for ages, and now they had awakened it. As they grappled with how to escape the house, Sheriff suddenly remembered the book. Perhaps it held the key to their freedom. But as they searched for answers, they discovered something even more horrifying. The last page of the book had some red stains that looked like dry blood. On that page was written an ancient incantation. Sheriff tried to read it, but strangely, his body began to tremble. He felt that reading the incantation might plunge them even deeper into the curse. But just then, a harsh sound filled the room, as if someone was calling out their names. The sound was faint at first, but it grew louder and clearer. Sheriff realized that the call wasn't for them, it was for their blood. Raffi screamed in terror, tears streaming down his face. He knew that this cursed force wouldn't let them go. But Sheriff, gathering all his strength, decided to read the incantation one last time. He knew this might be their only chance. Sheriff began to recite the incantation, and a cold wind started to blow through the room. The images on the walls seemed to come to life, and strange shadowy figures began to gather around them. With each word of the incantation, the shadows grew thicker, as if they were merging into a terrifying form. Raffi was trembling with fear, his eyes filled with panic. He felt as though his body was being drained of all its energy. He reached out to stop Sheriff, but his body was too weak to move. Sheriff, summoning all his inner courage, finished the incantation. As he uttered the final word, the entire room began to shake. The images on the walls seemed to tear away, and the shadowy figures merged into a huge black mass. The mass slowly moved toward them, accompanied by a dreadful scream. Sheriff realized that the incantation had not saved them, but had awakened something even more terrifying. The shadow stopped in front of them and then suddenly lunged at Sheriff. Sheriff's body froze, his eyes widened, and not a sound escaped his lips. For a moment, everything stood still, and then Raffi saw Sheriff's body slowly collapse to the floor. His eyes were vacant. His face held an expression of loneliness. Raffi thought his friend might have lost his life to this shadow. But then, the shadow suddenly disappeared, and all the lights in the room came back on. Raffi was startled, feeling as if he had just awakened from a horrible nightmare. Sheriff lay motionless, but his face bore an expression of peace, as if he had finally found release after a dreadful battle. Raffi began to cry, thinking he had lost his dear friend. But suddenly, Sheriff's lifeless body twitched, and his eyes slowly opened. Sheriff slowly sat up, his eyes glowing with an eerie light. Raffi was shocked to see that Sheriff had completely changed. The familiar brightness in his face was gone, replaced by a deep darkness. Sheriff said, "We are free, but this house will never be." Raffi realized that this experience had changed their lives forever. They left the house, but as they walked away, they felt the shadowy figure still watching them. They sensed that in the future, others might enter the house and face the same terrifying ordeal. The cursed force hidden in the darkness of the house might never be completely eradicated, and this house would forever remain a source of haunting stories. This way, the story concludes with Sheriff and Raffi surviving the ordeal, but the cursed house's terror stays with them forever.